I'm Audrey, and I've always been the second best in my family. My sister, Sarah, is 5 years older than me and has always been the golden child. From the moment I can remember, everything in our house revolved around her. Sarah got the best of everything, and I got the leftovers. She went to some fancy private school while I was stuck in the local public one. Don't get me wrong, my parents made good money, but apparently not enough for both of us to have nice things. I discovered my love for drawing when I was about 8. I'd spend hours sketching in my room, trying to capture the world around me on paper. When I showed my parents my drawings, hoping they'd be proud, Dad just shrugged. "That's nice, Audrey, but don't waste too much time on it. You need to focus on getting a real job someday. You're not as academically inclined as your sister." Those words stung, but I didn't let them stop me. I started looking up drawing tutorials online, using my allowance to buy cheap art supplies. I'd hide in my room, painting and sketching, dreaming of the day I could show the world my art. Meanwhile, Sarah was the star of the family. Mom and Dad threw money at her like it was going out of style. Dance lessons, acting classes, singing tutors, you name it, Sarah tried it. And gave up on it, usually within a few months. "I'm just not feeling the dance vibe anymore," Sarah announced one day, tossing her ballet shoes in the trash. "I think I want to try photography now." Without missing a beat, Mom said, "Of course, sweetie. We'll get you the best camera and a new laptop for editing. Maybe we can convert the spare room into a darkroom for you." I couldn't believe my ears. Here I was, begging for a few dollars for paintbrushes, while Sarah got an entire room for her latest whim. But that's how it always was in our house. The only person who seemed to see me was Grandma Helen, Mom's mother. She lived nearby in a cozy little house, and visiting her became my escape. One day, she caught me sketching in her garden. Well, she said, peering over my shoulder. "Looks like we've got a regular Picasso here." For the first time, someone looked at my art and saw potential. Grandma Helen's eyes sparkled as she hatched a plan. "How about we set up a little studio for you here? I've got that spare room upstairs that's just collecting dust." Before I knew it, Grandma had transformed that dusty old room into an artist's paradise. She bought me an easel, real artist quality paints, and even signed me up for private lessons with a local artist. As the years rolled by, the gap between Sarah and me only widened. Our living room turned into a shrine to Sarah's so-called achievements. A massive display case dominated the wall, crammed with her certificates, ribbons, and trophies. Most of them were participation awards, but you'd think she'd won Olympic gold the way our parents fawned over them. One day, I timidly approached Mom with a small painting I'd done. It had just won first place in a local art competition. "Hey, Mom? I was wondering if maybe we could put this up somewhere." Mom barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's nice, honey. But where would we put it? The wall's already full of Sarah's things. Maybe you can keep it in your room?" I retreated, clutching my painting. My room became my gallery, walls plastered with artwork that no one but me and Grandma Helen ever saw. When Sarah graduated high school, you'd have thought royalty was going off to college. Mom and Dad spared no expense, sending her to the most prestigious university they could find. They even rented her a luxury apartment near campus. With Sarah gone, you'd think I'd get more attention. Fat chance. Mom and Dad spent hours every day video chatting with her, cooing over her latest adventures. Meanwhile, I was lucky if they remembered I existed at dinner time. Then, like a hurricane, Sarah burst back into our lives. She'd barely graduated when she showed up on our doorstep with a guy in tow. "Mom, Dad," she squealed. "Meet Jake, my husband." Mom and Dad, instead of asking the obvious questions, like, "Oh, I don't know," why they weren't invited to the wedding, just embraced them both. "Oh, sweetie, we're so happy for you," Mom gushed. "Welcome to the family, son." Dad slapped Jake on the back. I stood in the background, invisible as always. Congrats, I guess," I muttered. Sarah barely acknowledged me. "Thanks. Oh, by the way, Jake's going to be living with us for a while. That's cool, right? Before I could process what was happening, Jake was moving his stuff into our guest room. Just like that, our household dynamic shifted again. 2 months flew by in a blur of awkward family dinners and tense silences. Sarah and Jake had taken over the house like a pair of entitled royals, and I was counting down the days until I could escape to college. Then, one evening, Dad called me into the living room. "Audrey, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from those words in this house. Mom and Dad sat on the couch, with Sarah and Jake lounging nearby. I perched on the edge of an armchair, feeling like I was facing a firing squad. Dad cleared his throat. "Audrey, you know we've been saving for your college fund." I nodded, a glimmer of hope rising in my chest. Maybe they were finally going to do right by me. "Well," he continued, "we've decided to give that money to Sarah instead." The world stopped. I must have misheard. "What?" Mom jumped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Sweetie, Sarah needs it more. She's married now, starting a family. We have to think about their future." I looked at Sarah, who couldn't even meet my eyes. Jake just smirked. The injustice of it all hit me like a tidal wave. "Are you kidding me? You've given Sarah everything her whole life, and now you're taking away the one thing you promised me?" "Watch your tone, young lady," Mom snapped. "You should be grateful we're not charging you rent for living here and eating our food all these years." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grateful? For doing the bare minimum as parents? Dad stood up, his face red. "That's enough. You're an adult now, Audrey, it's time you started acting like one." He disappeared into the hallway and returned with a new suitcase. He dropped it at my feet with a thud that echoed through my soul. "Consider this your graduation gift," he said coldly. "Pack your things and get out, tonight." I looked at each of them in turn, Dad's stern face, Mom's averted eyes, Sarah's guilty expression, Jake's smug grin. Not one of them spoke up for me. In that moment, something inside me broke. And in its place, a steely resolve took root. Without a word, I grabbed the suitcase and marched to my room. As I threw my belongings into it, I could hear Sarah's excited chatter through the wall. "Oh my God, Jake. We can turn Audrey's room into my walk-in closet. I've always wanted one of those." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. In less than an hour, I had packed up 18 years of my life. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary, my prison. Then, without saying goodbye, I walked out the front door. I stumbled up to Grandma Helen's porch, dragging my suitcase behind me. Before I could even knock, the door flew open, and there she was, arms outstretched. "Oh, Audrey," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." I broke down then, ugly sobs racking my body as Grandma held me. She guided me inside, sat me on her worn but comfortable couch, and listened as I poured out the whole sordid tale. When I finished, Grandma's eyes were blazing. "Those fools," she muttered. Then she took my hands in hers. "Audrey, listen to me. You're staying here, and we're going to figure this out together." I slept fitfully that night, but when I came downstairs the next morning, Grandma was at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and her laptop. "Sit down," she said, pushing a mug of coffee towards me. "We're planning your college education, I'm paying for it. Now, let's find you a proper art school." Over the next few weeks, Grandma and I pored over college brochures and websites. We finally settled on a prestigious art school a few hours away. I gathered my best paintings and drawings, carefully photographing each one for my portfolio. I wrote and rewrote my personal essay, pouring my heart onto the page. Grandma helped me collect glowing recommendations from my art teachers. Finally, we sent it all off. The waiting was excruciating, but Grandma kept me busy, encouraging me to paint and even setting up a small exhibition of my work in her garden for the neighbors. Then, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, the email arrived. I stared at my phone, too nervous to open it. "Well?" Grandma prompted. With trembling fingers, I tapped the screen. My eyes scanned the first line, and I let out a scream of joy. "I got in!" I shouted, jumping up and down. "Grandma, I got in!" From the moment I set foot on campus, I threw myself into every opportunity. I joined the art club, volunteered at gallery openings, and spent countless hours in the studios, honing my craft. My first art competition was terrifying, but when I won third place, the rush was indescribable. I called Grandma immediately, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "Just the beginning," she said. "Keep going." So I did. I entered more competitions, each one boosting my confidence. I started participating in exhibitions for young artists, seeing my work displayed alongside my peers. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Professors praised my unique style, classmates asked for collaborations, and I even started selling a few pieces. But it wasn't just about the art. I made friends, real friends who valued me for who I was. I joined study groups, went to parties, and even started dating a fellow artist named Ethan. Late one night, as I was putting the finishing touches on a painting for my midterm project, I realized something. All of this, was what I'd been yearning for my whole life. The freedom to express myself, to grow, to be valued for my talents and my personality. Graduation day arrived in a blur of black gowns and flying mortarboards. I landed a job at a local art gallery, arranging exhibits by day and pouring my soul onto canvas by night. It wasn't glamorous, I was basically a glorified clerk, but it was a foot in the door of the art world. "Hey, Audrey," my boss, Frank, called out one day. "We've got a spare wall next week. Want to hang some of your stuff?" I nearly dropped the sculpture I was carrying. "Are you serious?" He shrugged. "Why not? Your stuff's good. Might as well see if it sells." That little display changed everything. A couple of my paintings sold, then a few more. Soon, I was participating in local exhibitions, my name starting to buzz in art circles. Then came the fantasy series. It started as a fever dream, strange, whimsical creatures dancing across my canvas. I painted them obsessively, creating a whole world of odd, lovable beings. At one exhibition, a man in a sharp suit approached me. "Ms. Thompson? I'm from Dreamscape Animations. We're very interested in your work." Before I knew it, I was signing a contract. They wanted to turn my creatures into a cartoon. The day the first episode aired, Grandma and I sat glued to her TV, clutching each other's hands. "That's my little Gribble," I squealed as one of my creations waddled across the screen. The show was a hit. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Audrey Thompson's art. The animation studio commissioned a comic series, which I drew with giddy enthusiasm. As my reputation grew, so did the price tags on my paintings. It was surreal, watching collectors bid on my work like it was precious treasure. Frank, my boss at the gallery, pulled me aside one day. "Audrey, you're outgrowing us. How about we do a solo exhibition for you? Your own show, your rules." I threw myself into preparation, creating new pieces and carefully selecting from my existing work. The night of the opening, I stood in the gallery, surrounded by my art and a buzzing crowd. "Quite a turnout," a familiar voice said. I turned to see Frank, grinning. "Listen, kid, you're going places. How about I manage you full-time? We could really take your career to the next level." From that moment, everything accelerated. With Frank's connections and my creativity, we were unstoppable. My paintings hung in prestigious galleries, my name featured in art magazines. Through it all, Grandma Helen was my constant. She came to every exhibition, beaming with pride and offering words of encouragement. "Remember when you used to hide your drawings under your bed," she said one night as we celebrated another successful show. "Look at you now, setting the art world on fire." I hugged her tight, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You believed in me when no one else did." As we clinked our champagne glasses, I marveled at how far I'd come. From the unwanted second child to a rising star in the art world. But even with all the success, the best part was having Grandma by my side, sharing every triumph and setback. One day I burst into Grandma Helen's kitchen, my mind buzzing with ideas. "Grandma, you won't believe what Frank and I have planned. We're thinking of a cross-country tour, showcasing my work in major cities. And there's talk of an international exhibition in Paris next year." Grandma listened, her eyes twinkling with pride. But as I paused for breath, she reached out and took my hand. "Audrey, darling, I'm so proud of you. You've become such an accomplished young woman. But I think it might be time to consider reconciling with your parents." I wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped me. This was important to her. A week later, I found myself standing on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Mom answered the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Audrey," she said, her voice uncertain. "What are you doing here?" Dad appeared behind her, his face unreadable. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in, I suppose." The house hadn't changed much, but the atmosphere was heavy, oppressive. They grudgingly allowed me to stay for a few days, but it was clear I wasn't welcome. To my surprise, Sarah was still living at home. "Jake's gone," she said bitterly when I asked. "Mom and Dad kicked him out. Said he was a lazy bum." I bit back a retort about their double standards. This visit wasn't about settling old scores. Days crawled by in uncomfortable silence. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, their faces constantly pinched with disapproval. I was about ready to call it quits when Sarah cornered me in the kitchen. "So," she said, a familiar mocking tone in her voice, "what are you up to these days? Still doodling?" Something snapped inside me. I straightened up, meeting her gaze. "Actually, I'm one of the most popular and well-paid young artists in the country right now." The kitchen fell silent. I turned to see Mom and Dad frozen in the doorway. Suddenly, their entire demeanor changed. Mom's eyes lit up with a greedy gleam I'd seen directed at Sarah so many times before. "Oh, Audrey," she cooed, trying to take my arm. "Why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about you." I jerked away from her touch. "I was just leaving, actually." No, Dad interjected. "Stay. Tell us more about your work. How much do your paintings sell for?" I shook my head. "That's confidential information." His face hardened. "Now listen here, young lady. We're your parents. We have a right to know. After all we've done for you, you owe us." And there it was. The true colors I knew had been there all along. "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. "You kicked me out, remember? You chose Sarah over me at every turn. And now that I'm successful, you want a piece of it?" "No, I'm done." I brushed past them, ignoring their protests and demands. I threw my things into my bag and walked out the door, their angry voices fading behind me. When I told Grandma what happened, she smiled sadly. "Oh, Audrey, I'm sorry it went that way. But I'm proud of you for trying." As I drove home that night, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd given them a chance, more than they deserved. Now I could move forward, guilt-free, focusing on the people who truly cared about me and the art that had saved me. That call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Grandma Helen was in the hospital. I dropped everything and rushed to her side, my heart in my throat. For weeks, I barely left her room. I held her hand, told her stories, and tried to repay a fraction of the love and support she'd given me over the years. But in the end, she was gone. I threw myself into organizing the funeral, grateful for the distraction from my grief. It was a beautiful service, filled with people whose lives Grandma Helen had touched. I stood alone by her grave long after everyone else had left, feeling more lost than I had in years. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a notary. "Ms. Thompson, we need to discuss your grandmother's will." I sat in the sterile office, numb, as the lawyer read out the details. And to my beloved granddaughter, Audrey Thompson, I leave all my worldly possessions, including my house and savings." I couldn't believe it. Grandma Helen had left me everything. I was just starting to find my footing again when Sarah showed up on my doorstep. "Audrey," she said, her eyes red-rimmed. "I need your help. I'm pregnant. I left Mom and Dad, I couldn't take their nagging anymore. But now I have nowhere to go, no money." I listened, a mix of pity and suspicion churning in my gut. "Sarah, I'm sorry you're in this situation, but what do you expect me to do?" "Give me my share," she demanded. "I need Grandma's money." I shook my head. "There is no your share, Sarah. Grandma left everything to me." Her face contorted with rage. "That's not fair. You must have tricked her, you thief. I'll take you to court, you'll see." I slammed the door, my hands shaking. But it wasn't over. The next day, Mom called. "Audrey, be reasonable," she wheedled. "Your sister needs help. We're family, you owe us." "I don't owe you anything," I replied, my voice ice cold. "You kicked me out, remember? Where was your sense of family then?" I hung up. But they weren't done. Suddenly, my social media was flooded with accusations. Posts from my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all claiming I'd manipulated Grandma Helen, that I was a thief who'd stolen their rightful inheritance. Then came the rumors of a lawsuit. Apparently, Sarah and my parents had gone to a lawyer, convinced they could challenge the will. But as quickly as the rumors started, they died down. The law was clear, Grandma Helen's will was ironclad. Through it all, I clung to Grandma's last words to me. "Be strong. Keep painting your dreams." And that's exactly what I did. I poured my pain and anger into my art, creating some of my most powerful pieces yet. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of color and creativity. My paintings hung in prestigious galleries across the country, my name was featured in art magazines, and I even did a few TV interviews. It was surreal, seeing my face on the screen, talking about my journey and my art. But even as I reveled in my success, a shadow lurked at the edges of my life. Despite their failed attempts to challenge Grandma's will, my parents and Sarah hadn't given up their campaign of harassment. I'd learned to ignore it, to focus on my art and the positive relationships in my life. Then came the night of my biggest exhibition yet. The gallery was packed, the atmosphere electric. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my latest works, feeling on top of the world. "Audrey, darling, this is your best show yet," Frank gushed, clapping me on the back. That's when I saw them. Mom and Dad, pushing through the crowd, their faces twisted with rage. Before I could react, Mom had uncapped a can of paint and flung it at my centerpiece. "Thief," Dad bellowed as the red paint dripped down the protective glass. "She stole our money." The room erupted into chaos. Security guards rushed in, wrestling my parents towards the exit. Guests whispered and pointed, their shocked faces illuminated by camera flashes. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, and they'd turned it into a circus. As the guards escorted my parents out, Mom's shrill voice echoed through the gallery. "She tricked her grandmother. That money should have been ours." The exhibition was effectively over. Even though the paintings were undamaged, thanks to their protective coverings, the mood was shattered. As I watched the last guests trickle out, something inside me hardened. Enough was enough. The next morning, I marched into a lawyer's office. "I want a restraining order," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to sue for defamation." I laid out everything, the social media harassment, the threatening messages, the scene at the gallery. The lawyer listened, his expression grave. "We have a strong case," he assured me. "They've gone too far." The legal process was grueling, but I stood my ground. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. My parents and Sarah were legally barred from contacting me, or coming near me or my property. The defamation suit was settled out of court, with a public retraction of their claims. As I left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. I traveled the world, finding inspiration in bustling cities and quiet villages alike. My exhibitions became events, celebrated in the art world and beyond. But more than the fame or the money, I found joy in giving back. I started a program offering free art classes to kids from low-income families, remembering how art had been my lifeline. Years have passed since that day in court. I haven't spoken to my parents or Sarah since, and I don't intend to. Some bridges, once burned, are better left in ashes. But I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. Grateful for Grandma Helen, who believed in me when no one else did. Grateful for the struggles that shaped me and the triumphs that followed.